Is libertarianism going to destroy America or help America? In this week's episode, that's what we're going to discuss. So, welcome back to Mac and Mike. I'm Mike. My friend to my left is Mac. And we want to talk about libertarianism today because we have well known people. For example, I love Greg Gutfeld and Kennedy, who used to be the MTV disc jockey, and Kat Timpf both declared themselves to be libertarians. But I've thought a lot about libertarianism over the past 20 or so years. You know, one of the famous guys, Rand Paul, and his father, Ron Paul, were big libertarians. But I often thought the saying is least governed, Mac, is best governed. So I went to artificial intelligence and I asked, are there any countries in the world that represent truly what libertarianism is? And you know what came up?
No.
Somalia. So that is a prime example of the end result of libertarianism taken too far. But there are aspects that are somewhere in between. There's always gradations in thought processes. So I looked it up because there are a couple complicated words, just so we understand. The one branch, sorry if you hear a thunderstorm, is called Minarchism, which is kind of like what we have in an understanding with Cat Timp and others. We want a smaller government, but then the end result is anarcho-capitalism, which is essentially what Somalia has fallen into. There are no real libertarian governments in the world. There are some that are closer than others, like Switzerland, but even they have quite a few problems. So, what have your thoughts been? You're an old fart like me. What have your thoughts been about libertarianism, Mac?
Well, Mike, shockingly, there are very few people who are registered libertarians. There are very few people who belong to some sort of libertarian organization. Many more people claim to be libertarians than there are those that are officially kind of identified or registered. And I think that the idea of libertarian is one that people identify with when they have a particular issue that they're struggling with. We've had a war on drugs in this country for a number of years, and the war on drugs has caught up a number of very, very bad people. That is, the very biggest kinds of dealers in illicit drugs. It's also caught up some petty kind of small time users, and libertarians believe, for the most part, all generalizations are false, including this one, but libertarians believe, for the most part, that an adult should be able to put into their body whatever they want to. Now, that's a pretty easy thought and a pretty easy approach to identify with, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're an adult and you pay your taxes and you pay your bills and you do all those things you're supposed to do, isn't it reasonable to assume that you have the authority and the ability to put into your body any kind of substance that you want to put into your body? It is, after all, your body. And the people on the Democratic side that are pro-abortion, don't they say my body, my choice all the time?
Yeah.
So, but is it reasonable to have all drugs available to all people, all adults, excuse me, with no restrictions? I think reasonable people in a civilized society can have that debate, but libertarians have already decided that's what they believe in. No restrictions on drugs. When it comes to, I just mentioned abortion, my body, my choice. Libertarians are not sure what they believe on that. There's people in libertarian organizations that believe in being pro-choice and those that believe in being pro-life. When it comes to like Second Amendment issues, libertarians are probably the most staunch supporters of the Second Amendment that exist. So there are a lot of ways in which libertarianism or libertarians themselves fall into the ideas that are espoused by either the Democrats or the Republicans. Most Republicans, let me just say this, the Republican platform is a pro-life platform. That doesn't mean that all Republicans believe in pro-life or dismiss pro-choice, but most of them do. So what do libertarians, libertarians don't want us to have a standing army. They don't believe in defense, really. They believe in individual rights and freedoms, but they don't necessarily want the United States of America to be the industrialized defender of the world. That's appealing to some people. I mean, you have to get right down to the individual question until you understand what the libertarians actually believe and actually are for. And being that there are such a relatively small group of people that have officially identified themselves, I think it's kind of hard to figure out whether or not libertarian ideas will turn the United States into Somalia or not. I know this, with the way their two-party structure is built, libertarians have very little chance of actually gaining real power in the United States.
Yeah, as far as I know, the only libertarian is Rand Paul. I believe so, and he happens to be in the Republican Party. So it's really a clash of ideas about the size of government when it comes down to it. That's why it's called the Minarchists and the Anarcho-Capitalists. Minarchists are the primary movers and shakers. They just keep pushing for a smaller and smaller government. The three things that they want is to be controlled is the courts, the police, and defense, but not the kind of defense, as Mac mentioned, we have here in America now. Not this huge military that goes all around the world, but a military strong enough to defend us. And that's why they're big Second Amendment people, because they believe, like in Switzerland, everybody has a weapon or is trained in a weapon, adult males, anyhow. And they used to have to mandatorily keep them in their home in
Yes.
case they had to defend the homeland. Now they can put them in armories and other things, but everybody still has to serve in the military. Men, women have to serve in some capacity, maybe a nurse or something. They don't have to be militarily trained. Some of them are. But that is the closest thing, I guess, to a reasonable country other than Somalia that has some libertarian uh, leanings. The question is always how much of my tax money is going to go to the things that we need as a society to hold it together. And that's the constant tension. Like Democrats, think about it. They want the government to control everything, and they have become rather socialist and communistic. Um, and I'm not saying that in a negative way. I mean, it's a thought. It's never worked, but libertarian has never worked. So we have this tension where we have a certain group of libertarians or ideologies of libertarians in the Republican Party, not so much. Libertarianism really can't exist in the Democrat Party, except for maybe body autonomy, like you were mentioning about abortion. But then you have that other faction that says, my body, my choice. But then the people that believe the baby is a body with its own rights, that's the part of libertarianism that gets them confused because you can't really come to an agreement on that. But by and large, I think the Republican Party is the only home for people with libertarian type ideas, but not that has not been accepted broadly in the Republican Party because it's again, where do we draw the line? If you drew like Rand Paul, we would not ever be involved in a foreign war, not even if people were building weapons and saying they were going to drop nukes on us. He'd say, oh, wait till they do it, you know? And that's the problem what we're facing with the war in Iran right now. Then you have the economy. Um, was it Ayn or Ayn Rand, however you say it, Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand. If you ever saw Atlas Shrugged, there's a logical outcome, but they end up in this utopia type situation that's hidden and sequestered from the world by a technology that prevents the outside world from seeing them. So that solves the problem of the standing army and the military. You don't need one if people can't find you. And of course, when we look at practicality on government services like healthcare. Uh, you know, you were talking about drugs. You should be able to, maybe, wouldn't it be nice if I'm a smart guy. I know when I need an antibiotic or an antiviral. I don't need a doctor to tell me. Wouldn't it be nice if I could just go down to the pharmacy and say, hey, give me some antivirals or antibiotics? We're not talking at that point about hallucinogenics and other type of drugs that alter our behavior in such a way that now we cross the line and we are affecting other people. And you can take something simple like motorcycle helmet laws. Well, if my tax dollars are going to a healthcare system of any sort, of course, I can mandate that you protect yourself so that my tax dollars don't have to go for a brain injury. And that's the reason behind helmet laws. And libertarians would say, oh, no, no, you can't mandate people wear helmets. But then who's going to? I think it was Glenn Beck. Is he a libertarian too, sort of, or has?
I don't believe so, but
Well, he made a comment about, and I'll shut up so you can talk in a minute. But I remember one time that he said something that I did agree with. He said, we can't become a libertarian society in America until we are ready to step over the dead bodies of those who with needles in their arms or starving, because starving people don't get your money if they're, seen as malcontents that won't work. The Bible says if a man doesn't work, he won't eat. That's kind of a libertarian idea too. So we're not going to prop people up with welfare system anymore. You're basically on your own as an individual. So it really doesn't
libertarians
work.
don't believe, you mentioned helmet laws, they don't believe in speed limits laws either.
True.
And they don't like the fact that government builds roads. They would rather have privately built roads and have those roads managed privately, and the pricing and the cost to use those roads passed on to the actual users of the roads. They say, an adult should be able to put into their body whatever they want. Likewise, they believe that if a human being, an adult, wants to do some sort of surgery on themselves and change their outward appearance from male to female or female to male, they should be able to do that. What about the kids? When does somebody become an adult? If you have a 16-year-old who is very, very advanced and very intelligent, should they be able to decide whether or not they take LSD or they smoke crack or not? And what's the age? Is the age arbitrary? Is the age of consent, the age of adulthood 18? Or is it 21? Or is it 26? And you can stay on your parents' uh,
Insurance.
insurance until age 26. So that kind of indicates you're not capable of taking care of yourself until that age. So there's all kinds of issues with libertarian thought and thinking. And I don't know who gets to make those rules. They don't believe in eminent domain. If the government wants to build a highway and you have the key piece of property that stops them from building the highway or the school or the hospital or whatever is for the common good, they believe that government needs to negotiate a price based on what every other bidder, private bidder, is willing to pay for it. So it's not fair market value. It's value based on whatever someone's willing to pay. Is it righteous for one property owner to be able to stop the brand new interstate highway system that connects the northern states to the southern states in an easy manner and benefits all? Because libertarians would say that it does. And should there be eminent domain? I don't know the answer to that, but I do think there are times when, for the betterment of the community, there has to be some way for government to be able to get those projects completed, even in the face of individual. And I'm a big individual property rights guy, so don't send me hate mail that says you're not for individual property rights. I am. I'm just saying that there are times when, for the betterment of society as a whole, maybe eminent domain is the tool that needs to be used, even if they are, in the case of eminent domain, they're forced to pay twice as much or three times as much as the appraised or estimated value of the property is. I also believe that, libertarians, in their belief that anyone can do whatever they want to their bodies and anyone can drive as fast as they want, where do we where do we make public safety an issue if someone is taking cocaine or some other illicit drug and goes out on the interstate highway driving 100 miles an hour? Is that okay? Because I think many libertarians would say they may not like it, but that's what you have in a libertarian society. What happens when the person that's high on cocaine and driving 100 miles an hour smashes into another vehicle? And it's not only property damage, maybe it's just crashes into a building. But what if deaths occur because of the high rate of speed and the incapacitation from the drug use? How is that reconciled with the people who have lost loved ones or the individuals who lost their life? Is there not some duty of civilization, of society, to protect those people? And I think that libertarian thoughts most people kind of gravitate to until you start having a debate about where you draw the line.
Yeah, I see a Mad Max world when you're talking about that kind of thing, because that's kind of what was symbolized there, is everybody had their own ability to do pretty much what they wanted. But see, that's the problem. In any country the size of ours, let's say theoretically, it could suddenly overnight become even a minarchist libertarian society where there are still some rules. There wouldn't be enough rules in place to prevent little fiefdoms almost from showing up. Like Afghanistan's very tribal. You'd have different tribes and they'd all have their own level of rules. Like in Switzerland, their states are called cantons, and the federal government is weaker. Uh, Taxation, I think, from the national levels around 11%, but then each canton has its own tax level, and they vary widely from my research. So do you know what the average cost of a home is in Switzerland
No,
nationwide? $1.5 million
it's a lot of money.
average cost. Most people live in an apartment that runs them like $3,000 a month for a two-bedroom because that's all most people can afford. Uh, they actually earn less than the average American. So you can see that they're really stuck in a situation, and that's not even true libertarianism. That's just a small taste of it. That's artificial intelligence said that's the closest, I guess, you're going to see besides Somalia. So of course, Somalia is an extreme.
Well, then there's the matter of taxation. Libertarians believe in the smallest government possible. In the smallest government possible, where do we have the programs that most Americans agree with, whether they want to fund them or not? Do we want to have school lunch programs for kids who
Exactly.
might not have a meal that day because of their socioeconomic position? And I think most Americans would say if that's the only meal that that young person gets today, they don't mind their tax dollars being used for that. Libertarians would disagree. And I think that there are other things, when government does things that are for the common good, we're talking defense, we're talking building of the interstate highway system. Libertarians generally disagree with government getting involved in those kinds of things. Well, if there is no military to defend the nation, if there is no interstate highway system, if it's all private roads, who's going to be doing the coordination of where those roads meet? Who's going to be doing the coordination of where the signals and the traffic laws begin and end? There's a whole range of issues that and I'm just talking about transportation and defense, and there's 1,000 different issues that require some level of central planning, Um, when you're laying out a new community and you say, okay, we're going to have streets here, and we're going to have roads here, and we're going to have alleys here, and this part of the area is going to be set aside for businesses, and this part is going to be set aside for for residences. What about if your next door neighbor decides to raise pigs in her backyard? Most libertarians would say, well, it's private property rights and those people have the right to do what they want. Well, if you're living next door to somebody who raises pigs in their backyard, you're not going to like it very much. And that's where things like zoning and other reasonable restrictions on property rights come in. And I just, again, when you first hear about being libertarian and you hear many of the things that they espouse, no restrictions on guns at all, everyone can take whatever drug they want. There's a certain logic to the thought that if I'm a 30-year-old adult and I'm not hurting anybody other than myself, what's wrong with me being a cocaine addict, right? I, that's a that's a line of logical thinking that is not necessarily so flawed as to be improbable or implausible. But doesn't that cause problems in other areas, in societal areas? And are we willing to accept those societal, you know, here's an idea. Go to San Francisco, go to LA, and see the people that are living on the street. And in a libertarian society, that's okay. They want to live on the street. That's all right. What about the people that have to walk across the naked bodies and the human excrement on the sidewalk in front of their business? Should they be forced to uh, accept that level of crudeness, of depravity in front of their business? I think that if you want to be too permissive, that can be a problem in a civilized society.
Yeah, well, you touched on education a while back. And in a libertarian society, there are no public schools, so we don't have to worry about the paying for the public lunch thing. They're privately run, and uh, even in a libertarian society, your prison system is privately run, and that leaves itself wide open to various types of treatment
And abuse.
and abuse. Yeah, both directions. Some could be too lenient, and some could be too strict. What's the statistics? It's misquoted that 2% of criminals cause 90% of the crime. That's not a true statistic. I looked it up. It's 1% causes 60. So, I mean, maybe it extrapolates out, but there's never been a study that 2% causes 90. But you also mentioned, all the other infrastructure things that we have. And it's kind of funny because you mentioned California. Now, this that's an interesting subject. And the reason I find it so interesting, it just dawned on me when you said that. It's a Democrat-controlled state, and Democrats are about big government and power. Yet when it comes to the individual living on the street, the drug addict, the mentally ill, the homeless in general, whether, maybe there's some out there that aren't mentally ill or drug addicts, they just let it go in a libertarian sort of fashion. That's what Glenn Beck was kind of alluding to. Until we're willing to step over the excrement, as you mentioned, the needles, the dead bodies, you can't have a libertarian society. Maybe it wasn't that Glenn Beck is libertarian. Maybe he was talking sort of against the anarcho-capitalism type of libertarianism that I mentioned earlier, which is Somalia. Um, I don't know that there's a lot more to say about this, except my only thought is it's so true, as we've had discussions in the past about politics. Doesn't matter if it's Democrat, Republican, or Libertarian. The question is always, where do we draw the line on anything, whether it's defense budgets, policing, uh, you know, your local township, as you mentioned, where to put the fire hydrants. Is there a volunteer fire department you were dealing with, or should it be paid fire department? All these questions, people are going to differ. So would you have different laws in every city? And what happens because you're not familiar with the laws, you're in another town and they have a little stricter law than the average libertarian section that you came from.
And there may not be any laws.
Yeah, well, that's like Mad Max and the
Yeah.
Thunderdome, man.
Well,
Somalia, here I come.
there's an old adage in Old English law that goes like this. You have an absolute right to swing your fist up into the point where it hits my nose. And I think that's the basic problem of libertarianism. I have the right to swing my fist. You have the right to not have your nose broken. But what happens when my fist hits your nose and there's no law and there's no set of rules for how to handle that?
Yeah. I think you just had an incident you were telling me about where somebody cashed a check on somebody that was illegally done. And even in our great society, with all of its laws, it's difficult for this person to get their money back.
Yep.
And it's like, wow, if it goes into the civil courts, it's taken out of the criminal courts. And now you got to wait and you got to pay money to your lawyers. And I chihuahua, it's crazy. So I don't want to poo-poo libertarian ideas. I don't want people to take me wrong. I think there's room, especially in the Republican Party, for cutting back on the amount that we're doing. We don't need to do as much as we are doing. Um, we think about the billions of dollars lost in Medicare and other scams across the nation. The Libertarian has a point there. Well, maybe we shouldn't be as heavily involved. Maybe leave that more at the local level because anything at the local level has more accountability than something that's money sent to you from Washington, D.C. That's kind of another libertarian thought. Everything is better controlled locally, not just less government, but more local. Some things should be.
Mike, before we had a very large, robust, and generous welfare system, when people were in need, it typically was the local community that helped out. The widow who lost her husband and she had two or three children and she didn't have enough food to eat. Typically, what happened is the local church community or some local charity community gathered together with several of the people in the community and they would provide a monetary stipend, package or a grant of food or a grant of some sort of clothing. In other words, they would support her in various ways. And the woman and the children accepting the charity recognized that their neighbors went without or they moved forward with less because the charity that came to them to help them out. So there really was a true sense of gratitude on the part of those receiving the charity, recognizing that their neighbors gave it to them out of the goodness of their heart and at the cost of their own satisfaction or their own comfort. Today we have a welfare system paid for by the government that is so large and so obese and so generous that people come from other countries just to sign up for our welfare system.
Yeah.
They never intend to work. They just want to come in and they want to take part of the system. And from a libertarian perspective, that's a bad thing. And I agree with that. But what about, can we go back to a non-welfare, a non-government appropriated welfare system? I'm not sure we can.
Well, that's the problem. Once you give people things for free, it's impossible to take it back. We think about another issue, which is Social Security, which we know if we don't do something about it, it's going to go bankrupt. There's no way. It's unsustainable. And there are solutions that are incremental. And that's another aspect of libertarianism. There's sort of this incremental type libertarianism where you don't try and change everything all at once, but you take incremental steps. So, incrementalism, for example, in Social Security would be since we're living like 20 years longer on average than when Social Security was first instituted,
Yep.
just start gradually, like every year, move the minimum age you can collect it up by 6 months, even every year. And over time, it'll probably level out. You can also do means testing. That's unfair in a libertarian world, too. So,
Yes.
you have the problems with that thought because even though we're not a libertarian country, there are people who will make that argument that are, maybe just good people. It's not fair to use mean testing. After all, you paid into it.
Yep.
So we draw this arbitrary line that people earning this amount of money will not get Social Security.
Right.
Then you have your health care, your Medicare system. They talk about changing that, means testing that. And interestingly enough, back to Switzerland, who, again, the only reason I keep bringing them up is AI said they're about one of the closest minarchist type libertarian countries, which they aren't, but they're the closest. All their health insurance, private.
Yep.
It's not public like other places in Europe. However, it does have the mandate that Obama put in place here in America that Trump got rid of, that you're mandated to buy your own insurance. All insurance is nonprofit driven, and all medical is private. The government doesn't fund it. So, that's an interesting little tidbit.
And there are many Americans who would say that that's not the America they want. They don't want Aunt Mildred to not have a safety net of Social Security or Medicare. Most people would say that. And, the alternative to the Social Security system is, okay, all the money that people paid into Social Security, give it back to them and end the Social Security system. Sure, it's a big hit now, but the future obligations are significantly less. But we all know what would happen in that case. 20 or 30% of the people would be prudent and would invest their money, and 20 or 30% would be absolutely frivolous and
Spend it
spend the
all.
money on taking trips and buying fancy cars, and they would again be either on the welfare system or in the streets. And that's just human nature.
You're right. That the human nature part of this is something we didn't discuss. And of course, you and I are Christians, so we believe that the nature of the human being is sinful. In other words, you don't have to teach a child to do wrong, you have to teach a child to do right. That means it's born into us. I'm not saying as mature Christian adults or even I've met non-Christians, they don't intend to go out and sin or do harm to other people and commit violence, but none of us are free from that completely. Greed, anger, lust, all those things affect us. And because of that greed, especially, uh, and covetousness, we want what other people have, and we're greedy. So the greed drives people, even a libertarian society, to probably want to seize power. It's all about greed and power and me, because the me part is the ego part, which is the sin part. And in this world, I don't care if you're a Christian or not, you can't deny those things are true. We see them in every type of religion in the world. People are people. And because of that flawed human nature, libertarianism can never truly work.
So, is libertarianism the answer for America, or is it lead to America looking like Somalia?
Taken to its extreme, it's like Somalia.
Yeah.
Taking it incrementally, at least to the point of we don't need to call it even libertarianism. It's just incremental cutbacks on the amount that we're doing as a society where the majority can agree, which is the hard part.
Yeah, I think the basic foundation of libertarianism is individual responsibility. And to be perfectly honest with you, Mike, in our society, I'm not sure that the majority of Americans are ready to take on that responsibility.
That's true.
That's just sad truth.
Sad, sad but true. Well, did we beat it up enough?
I think so, brother.
All right.
Mac and Mike
Out.
out.